Welcome everyone to the Sister Stories podcast. This podcast's aim is to marvel at God's sovereignty over each of our lives as women and to encourage one another via our stories. My name is Sophie and today I'm joined by Lauren.
Hi.
Hi, thanks for joining me. First of all, can you tell us a bit about who you are?
I'm Lauren. I've been coming to Cornerstone for nearly 15 years. I'm married to Dan and we have 2 little girls.
Nice, thank you. And what do you do?
I'm a stay-at-home mum at the moment.
Great. Sorry. I thought we'd mention that just in case. Right. Okay. So we're going to be talking about your journey to faith and your walk with the Lord Jesus Christ. But to start off, can you tell me a bit about your family background, how you were brought up?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the eldest of 3 girls, and my mum and dad aren't Christians. And my sisters are 5 and 6 years younger than me, so I was by myself for quite a while. And my dad worked abroad a lot, so my mum brought us up, and she did always take us to church for the first kind of few years as a kind of, that's what you do with children. She'd been brought up going to church, that's what you did on a Sunday morning, and so she did the same with us.
Right, okay. So is that how you first were in contact with the gospel? Or
yeah, really? I remember very little of it. I remember going off to the Sunday school, my sisters not wanting to go because they didn't want to be away from my mum. And I don't remember any of the teaching, but I do remember always believing that there was a God. I believed in this man called Jesus and that he died and risen again. And so I can remember believing that from a very young age.
Right, okay. Can you tell us a little bit how that developed later on and maybe how you came to a true faith in Jesus?
Yeah, so after a while my mum stopped taking us to church, but I was still interested, and I had a children's Bible at home, and I would try and read that by myself. Didn't really understand it, but think I grabbed some basics from it. Like I knew that God had made the world. So yeah, the beginnings of teachings. And then when I was a teenager, I was able to go out by myself. So not every Sunday, but fairly frequently, I would walk to a local church and just go in there and listen to the service. I didn't really know what church was supposed to look like. But for me, it's just shown how God had put that interest in my heart, even from then. And interestingly, I do also know that there were people praying for me, members of my family. A lot of them are Christians. So underneath all of this very slow understanding, they were praying for me. Wow. So that was kind of the beginning. Right,
okay. So were you able to carry on and join that church properly, let's say, or not really?
Not really. I don't think I didn't really realise it was something that you could join as such. And then I left and came to uni. And hadn't come to uni thinking, I'll find a church or anything like that. Didn't bring a Bible to uni with me. It definitely wasn't something that I felt had, an everyday importance in my life. There was just this real basic, I believe in God. But I went to the Freshers' Fair, and the only way I can describe it is God put his hand on my back and pushed me towards the CU stand. I'd never heard of a CU. It wasn't the most interesting of the stands. It wasn't giving away all the fun free stuff. But I ended up there and I ended up talking to these really nice people who wanted to talk about Jesus. And I went to the CU meetings and met young Christians who were looking for a church. And I kind of thought, oh, that's a good idea. I'll do that as well. And at the time, Pete was doing some of the Bible studies with the Christian Union, and we were reading through Ephesians, and it began to strike me that there needed to be a response from me. And I was reading about not getting drunk on wine as this will lead to debauchery, and that was what I saw all around me as a student and would be partaking in as a student. And really being struck that something had to change. My life didn't reflect the things that I was slowly beginning to believe and understand. So I set about very much in my own strength to go out and not be be drinking, which was very difficult for me because I think I felt like that was the only way I could make friends. So I was failed because I was doing it in my own strength. And learned that I needed to rely on the Lord to be able to do these things, through a very kind friend who would pray with me and ask me how it went when she knew I was going out and things like that. And the Lord brought me through that. And I also remembered being like, oh, I need a Bible, and going out and buying one, and on a student loan and not having much money. It meant something to me. That was something I really needed to spend my money on. And I can remember reading it by myself and just crying at realizing that Jesus had died for me personally, and that he'd given up the glory of heaven that he'd had for so long, and he'd done it for me personally, not any wishy-washy, he died. It was for me, and it was massive.
I find it really interesting how it seems that you responded in action first, and in being convicted of your own behavior first, and then understood why that was relevant, why that was important. Is that accurate? Or
I think so. I mean, I believed that Jesus had died, but I just thought that's a nice thing to do for everybody, and I didn't understand the weight of that, and it hadn't become very personal at that point. I just knew that I wasn't living in the way that he would want me to, and that needed to change. But the more I read, the more I understood just what a sacrifice he made for me as an individual, as the one who sins and hangs him on that cross.
Great. So can you take us from there and how that faith grew? What happened next really in your life?
So I was coming along to Cornerstone, getting involved in the CU. In my second year as a student, I started going out with Dan. And he'd been brought up in a Christian home, so that was something quite different for me to experience and to meet his family. And so he was a real encouragement to me in being committed to the church and to reading the word, and still is. And when something comes up in life, actually turning to what God says as the first line of what you do. So God's just kept teaching me through those different things, through the struggles, often a lot more, because that's when we realise how much we need him and we're not in control.
So you came to what was Fairfield Church, is that correct? And then it evolved into Cornerstone. Great. So how long ago was that?
I think in September it'll be 15 years.
Wow. Oh, sorry, you said that earlier.
That's okay.
I forgot. My bad. Right. That's great. So obviously it's been quite a while and things have happened, including you having two beautiful daughters. I don't know, can you tell us a little bit more about how your life developed after that?
So I had some big struggles with my mental health. And it's still my testimony today that I wouldn't be here without knowing Jesus. I wouldn't have seen the point in carrying on, to be quite honest. And the Lord was then kind enough to, again, slowly bring me through that. He can take you straight out of it, but he teaches us in the pain. And he's always with us, even when we feel like he's not. And the blessing of other people always accepting me when I was just a mess and not really able to serve anybody else and just needed love. And then, the Lord gave us two beautiful children that once upon a time I really hoped for and didn't know that we would have. Did suffer a lot of complications after having Eva, which was incredibly difficult. And again, the church came alongside me and carried me and prayed for me. And I got to know more people because people were sending me cards and saying, we're praying for you. And I'm like, I don't know this person. But it was the most wonderful thing. And one thing, when Eva was a baby and it'd been really difficult, my uncle was also diagnosed with terminal cancer. And I really saw how the Lord prompts us by the Holy Spirit to make a choice to to do something or not, and how difficult it can feel, but how kind God is to use us like that. And I felt that I really needed to make sure he knew about Jesus, because he was going to go soon.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be disrespecting this man on his deathbed, but he needed to know. And that was the most loving, kind thing I could do to him. And so I wrote to him because he was a bit far away, and told him about Jesus and included verses. And then when he died, I went to his funeral and found out that he had been studying the Bible with the local pastor, and he'd planned his whole own funeral, which was just so evangelistic. All it aimed to do was tell people about Jesus. He had been studying the very same verses that God had put on my heart to send to him at the same time. And I went to that funeral feeling so sad at losing him. And I can remember my sadness turning to absolute joy at knowing that he was with Jesus.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And it was just wonderful to be part of seeing how God can use us.
Yeah, that's amazing. And seeing how that happens in the church as well, and how we experience things, and then someone says something and comforts us in it. We don't expect it, and we should expect it actually, because that definitely comes from God most of the time. So.
Yeah, and how when the Spirit prompts us, we can say yes to that. It can be difficult to say yes to that. Yeah, but God does great things.
Exactly. Yeah, and we need that push, as you were describing, to go towards the CU stand, or to go and send a letter to our uncle. Yeah, definitely. Great. And I wonder how the rest of your family responded to your faith, and how they respond today even.
Yeah, it's been interesting watching them as my journey of faith has continued, because it's become clear to them it's not a phase. Yes. Different members of my family react differently. My dad thinks I'm absolutely mad. But I think he's absolutely mad for not believing in Jesus. So.
Exactly, it's a fair enough.
My mum is very nice about it, and very pleasant. And then my sisters just don't mention it. Yeah. To be honest, they have done. I've certainly shared the gospel with them and told them various stories from the Bible, but it tends to be quite an avoided subject now. But the thing about having young children and raising them in a love and a knowledge of the Lord is that they come out with things and make people feel very uncomfortable. And it's wonderful. They are fantastic evangelical tools. So that's been interesting to see how they respond to how we raise the girls, and how they can question it or not agree with it. Yes. But it's a fantastic way to stand out and really show that, yes, my life is for Jesus.
Great. So it's been, roughly 17, 20 years that you're a Christian? Something like that?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So I know how it feels, because for me it's been 11 years, and it does feel like nothing's going to ever change. Yeah. But I know we can trust that the Lord is working behind the scenes, as you were saying with your uncle, really.
And that's what encourages me greatly. Yes. He went through one of the biggest sufferings of his life, and that's what the Lord used to bring him to salvation. Yes, you're right. That does make us question things. And the greatest suffering we see is the perfect Jesus on the cross, and yet the greatest possible good comes from it. Yes. God does use suffering.
Yes, that's right. For sure. Yeah. So we've talked about quite a few different things, and I wonder how these couple of years have affected you, how what things you have learned through the pandemic, and now it feels like we're after it. Sorry, but I wonder what God has been teaching you in that time.
Yeah, lots. It wasn't the easiest. When we went into the pandemic, I had a 1.5-year-old and a child who was in their first year at school. So homeschooling, and it required a lot of hands-on. She didn't know how to read at that point and things like that. So I couldn't just leave her to get on with her work. And then Lily was at a very different stage, our youngest. But we ploughed on through it. The women's Bible study online was wonderful and very, very hard to do with 2 children running around and a husband working in the other room. But equally a great blessing. And one of the things I'd previously learnt, but as I'm sure many people have experienced, God teaches us things, we learn them, and then we forget them again and continue on as we always did. And one of the things that I relearnt but felt solidified by that, by the pandemic, and especially in those earlier days, was the simplicity of asking for daily bread, and not to worry. And the reason I don't need to worry is because I can ask for daily bread, and that's all I need to do is ask for God to get me through today. I don't need to worry about tomorrow, because tomorrow I'm going to ask him to get me through the next day.
Yes.
And so when I would start to worry or panic or think this is an awful day, I would just say daily bread and turn to the Lord, and it just held me in the day, not my mind wandering. And I knew that it would be provided because he knows what we need, and he gives us abundantly more than that. And then the more things opened up, I think we can take for granted how much time we can spend together, how easy that is, the joy of being with the church. And having not been able to do that, the joy was afresh. And I still feel it now. Like, we've been able to see each other for quite a while, but the joy of being with the church, it feels safer than being with anybody else in the world. That we're united by Jesus, and he's unchanging. Just loving being with people. And I was also thinking about how much more joy I found in the word in just the last year. That there's everything in there, and if I don't understand a passage, somewhere else in the Bible is going to help me to understand that.
Yes.
And just becoming really, really excited, which has been so nice after kind of, sometimes we have to plod.
Yes, that's right. I think in the lockdowns, we're kind of stuck. So you feel that because you're not able to interact with as many people as you could, then just focusing on your own thinking is not helpful. So being able to then see people and face to face is making such a difference as well. I think that gives you that freshness of, actually, this person said this and I hadn't thought of it like that, and suddenly enlivens you again in a way. I don't know how to
and proper conversation to bounce off each other and what we've been learning, and ask each other about such a blessing. I love it.
Great. So to finish with, could you share with us some advice that you would give to perhaps younger Christians or even younger parents, or whatever you find is most appropriate or relevant?
I think in line with what I was saying about getting stuck into the word, really, doing it in all different ways. So, of course, alone, in one-to-ones, within Bible study settings and home groups, and then in church, and talk about it. I'm so encouraged when I get to talk with brothers and sisters about what we've been learning, and how iron sharpens iron, and how we can learn and help each other grow and be excited. So I just, get into the word, because also prepare for the suffering that we know will come in life before it happens. And we do that by getting into the word, and God plants it in our hearts and then prompts us by the Spirit in those difficult moments to remember his promises and what he's taught us.
Yes, that's right. And doing it as a church is so beneficial, isn't it? We can't live as a Christian without the church, can we?
We're family.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, great. Thank you so much, Lauren, for sharing your story with us. That's all for this episode of Sister Stories, everyone, but join us again next time.